All right, let's get right into it. We're talking about a conflict that started with just a single strike and has now somehow pulled in an entire region. We're on day 17 of this war in Iran. It's been almost 3 weeks, and the shockwaves from what was called Operation Epic Fury, well, they're being felt literally all over the world. So, the big question we're going to tackle here is, how did this happen? Right? How did an operation that was supposed to be targeted and specific just spiral into this massive regional crisis? Okay, so let's rewind to the beginning, the first 72 hours. It all kicks off on February 28th. The US and Israel launch Operation Epic Fury, hitting targets inside Iran. And this wasn't just any strike. They took out Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, in Tehran. A huge move. And Iran's response? It was swift and it was furious. Missiles and drones started flying almost immediately. To really get what Iran is doing, you have to understand their playbook. It's what's known as an asymmetric strategy. Look, they know they can't go toe-to-toe with the US military in a conventional war. That's a losing battle. So the goal isn't to win on the battlefield. It's to make the conflict so incredibly painful, politically and economically, that their enemies are basically forced to give up. And their biggest weapon in his playbook? It isn't a missile, it's economic. It's all about the Strait of Hormuz. I mean, so much of the world's oil flows through this tiny little channel. If Iran can shut that down, or even just threaten to, global energy prices go through the roof, and that puts massive pressure on the US and its allies. But don't get me wrong, it's not just about economics. Iran has a very real, very scary military trick up its sleeve. And it's a weapon that is giving defense planners nightmares. It's called the Sejil missile. Its nickname, the dancing missile. And yeah, it's as terrifying as it sounds. This thing is a sophisticated, homegrown piece of tech. So why is everyone so freaked out about this one missile? Well, a few reasons. First, it uses solid fuel. That might sound technical, but what it means is it's ready to launch almost instantly, no long prep time. Second, its range is huge. We're talking 2,000 kilometers. But here's the real kicker. The reason for its name. It can maneuver while it's in the air. It actually dodges missile defense systems like Israel's Iron Dome. It literally dances around their defenses. And just to give you a sense of how fast this thing is, from launch to impact, it can hit Tel Aviv in about 7 minutes. 7! That's barely enough time to warn people to take cover. It's an incredibly immediate threat. And as you can imagine, this war is not staying inside Iran, it's spilling over everywhere. Iran's proxies, like Hezbollah and Lebanon, are firing rockets. Israel is getting hit with direct missile and drone strikes. US bases in both Iraq and Kuwait are under attack. And now, even the Gulf nations are being dragged in. The UAE, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Oman, they're all being targeted. And with a widening war comes a staggering human cost. The total number of deaths in this conflict has now climbed past 2,000. But let's look closer at that number, because the impact on civilians is just devastating. We're seeing reports of at least 1,330 civilians killed inside Iran itself. And then there's Lebanon, which is just caught in the middle. The fighting there has already killed 850 people. And it's not just the death toll. The fighting in Lebanon has triggered a huge humanitarian crisis. Think about this. The UN is saying that more than 800,000 people have had to leave their homes. That's a massive number of people displaced in their own country. You know, beyond all the stats and numbers, there's this feeling of just utter despair. I want to share a quote from a resident who managed to flee Tehran. It really says it all. He says that hope is gone. He's worried the US is just going to declare some kind of victory, leave the same people in charge, and the future for everyday Iranians will just be higher prices and less hope. Okay, so what about the military progress? How's the campaign actually going? Well, according to the latest intel, US and Israeli forces have taken out a good chunk of Iran's missile launchers, somewhere around 260 to 290 out of about 425. That's progress, for sure. But that still leaves around 150 of them out there. That's a very real, very active threat. The Institute for the Study of War kind of sums up the situation perfectly. They're basically saying, hey, the campaign is hitting its targets, but it is nowhere near finished. So calling it a failure right now, that's jumping the gun. But this is clearly a tough, ongoing fight. Which brings us to diplomacy, or maybe more accurately, the lack of it. When President Trump was asked about making a deal to end this, his response was pretty straightforward. He basically said Iran might be ready to talk, but in his words, the terms aren't good enough yet. And that right there, that's the deadlock. You have the US and Israel on one side saying Iran has to completely give up its nuclear program, no exceptions. Then you have Iran on the other side saying, you started this and we will defend ourselves no matter what. They are just completely dug in on opposite sides. There's no middle ground to be found. So it all comes down to this really fundamental question, doesn't it? What does victory even mean here? For anyone. When one side has these incredibly ambitious goals, and the other side's goal is just to survive, the whole idea of winning gets really, really murky. And I'm going to leave you with one last thought on that, from an analyst named Frank Foer. He makes this fascinating point that by making the goal so huge, so unachievable, President Trump might have actually handed his enemies an easy win. All Iran has to do now is survive, and they can claim victory. It's a pretty sobering look at how these conflicts can spin out of control.